No, I can't marry you. Love doesn't pay bills.
Imagine rejecting the person who loved you most because they couldn't afford the life you wanted. Then, years later, watching the entire world celebrate the very man you once believed would never amount to anything. That is exactly what happened to one woman on a cold evening in New York, and by the end of that night, she would learn a lesson that no amount of money could erase. The applause inside the grand ballroom was deafening as one of America's most admired entrepreneurs stepped onto the stage to receive an award for changing thousands of lives. Every guest rose to their feet in admiration. Every guest except one. Near the back of the room stood a woman whose hands had begun to tremble. Her eyes filled with tears the moment she recognized the man walking toward the microphone. 7 years earlier, he had stood in front of her with nothing more than a small engagement ring, an honest heart, and a promise that he would spend the rest of his life loving her. She looked at the ring, looked at his worn-out clothes, and quietly shattered every dream he had. Love doesn't pay bills, she told him before turning her back and walking away. She believed she had escaped a lifetime of struggle. Instead, she had walked away from the greatest man she would ever know. Now, as cameras flashed and hundreds of successful men and women applauded him, she realized something that struck harder than regret. He had never needed revenge. Success had already spoken for him. And before this unforgettable evening came to an end, he would say something that would leave her in tears and leave everyone in that ballroom questioning what truly makes a person rich. Because this isn't just a story about rejection. It's a story about faith, sacrifice, second chances, and the painful cost of judging someone's future by their present circumstances. The man standing on that stage was now known across the country as Ethan Carter. Business magazines called him one of the most inspiring entrepreneurs of his generation. Television hosts praised his generosity. Employees described him as a leader who never forgot where he came from. To everyone in that ballroom, Ethan was a symbol of determination. But no one there knew what his life had looked like before success found him. Long before the headlines, the awards, and the standing ovations, Ethan lived in the quiet town of Maple Ridge, Ohio. It was the kind of place where everyone knew one another, where people waved from their front porches, and where hard work was respected more than expensive suits. Ethan wasn't born into wealth. His father had passed away when he was still a teenager, leaving his mother, Linda, to raise him alone. She worked double shifts at a local diner, often skipping meals so her son would never have to. Ethan never forgot those sacrifices. As soon as he finished high school, he gave up the dream of attending college. Instead, he found work at a neighborhood auto repair shop. Every morning before sunrise, he unlocked the garage doors, swept the floor, and spent the day repairing engines that many people had already given up on. The work was demanding, but he never complained. Every paycheck helped keep the lights on at home and paid for his mother's medical treatments. Money was always tight. Some weeks, after paying rent, buying groceries, and covering hospital bills, there was barely enough left to put fuel in his old pickup truck. Yet if someone in town needed help changing a tire or fixing a broken engine and couldn't afford it, Ethan was usually the first person to volunteer. Those who knew him often wondered why someone with so little was always willing to give so much. The answer was simple. His mother had taught him that a person's greatest wealth wasn't measured by the balance in a bank account, but by the kindness they showed when no one was watching. Those words stayed with him every day of his life. It was around this time that Ethan met Olivia Brooks. Their first meeting happened by chance at a community fundraiser. Olivia had volunteered to help organize the event after recently returning to town from college. She was intelligent, confident, and full of ambition. She dreamed of traveling the world, owning a beautiful home, and living a life far different from the one she had grown up in. When Ethan accidentally spilled coffee while helping set up tables, he was embarrassed beyond words. Olivia laughed. Not at him. With him. She handed him a stack of napkins and joked that at least everyone would remember his entrance. That small moment became the beginning of something neither of them expected. Over the following months, they grew inseparable. Weekend walks turned into long conversations about their dreams. Sunday afternoons became road trips through the countryside in Ethan's aging pickup truck. Neither of them cared that the truck's air conditioner barely worked or that the radio only picked up 2 stations. They were simply happy to be together. Friends often joked that it was only a matter of time before wedding invitations appeared in everyone's mailbox. Even Olivia's parents believed Ethan genuinely loved their daughter. But while Ethan dreamed about building a future together one careful step at a time, Olivia quietly carried a fear she rarely shared with anyone. She remembered the nights her own parents argued over unpaid bills. She remembered eviction notices. She remembered wondering whether there would be enough food for dinner. She promised herself that when she grew up, she would never allow money to control her life again. At first, those fears stayed hidden. But as Ethan's mother's medical condition worsened and financial pressure mounted, the cracks in their relationship slowly began to appear. Neither of them realized it then, but they were approaching the moment that would change both of their lives forever. The hospital visits became more frequent. Every month seemed to bring another medical bill, another prescription, another difficult conversation with doctors who could offer hope but never certainty. Ethan took on every extra shift he could find. If another mechanic called in sick, Ethan filled the gap. If a customer needed emergency repairs late at night, Ethan stayed until the work was finished. Some weeks, he barely slept. Yet every morning, he still found time to prepare breakfast for his mother before leaving for work. Linda often watched her son through the kitchen window as he drove away in his old pickup truck. She knew exactly what he was sacrificing. One evening, she quietly asked him, "When was the last time you bought something for yourself?" Ethan smiled. "I don't need anything." She looked at him for a long moment before replying, "You've been saying that for years." He changed the subject, but she understood the truth. Her son wasn't simply working hard because he wanted success. He was trying to protect everyone he loved from the hardships he had experienced growing up. Olivia admired his dedication, but admiration was slowly giving way to frustration. Whenever they planned a weekend together, another unexpected expense seemed to appear. A broken water heater, hospital bills, repairs on Ethan's truck. Every dollar had somewhere else to go. One Saturday evening, they sat outside a small diner, sharing a single slice of pie because Ethan insisted they could save money by splitting dessert. Olivia stared across the parking lot at a luxury SUV pulling into the restaurant. A well-dressed couple stepped out, laughing as they handed their keys to the valet. "They don't seem to worry about bills," she whispered. Ethan followed her gaze, but said nothing. After a few seconds, he quietly replied, "One day we'll have enough. We just have to be patient." She forced a smile, but inside, patience was becoming harder to hold on to. As months passed, the differences between them became impossible to ignore. Ethan believed success was built one honest day at a time. Olivia believed opportunities had expiration dates. She began spending more time with coworkers whose conversations revolved around expensive vacations, investment portfolios, and luxury neighborhoods. They often questioned why someone as bright and beautiful as Olivia was dating a mechanic who still drove an old pickup truck. At first, she defended Ethan. Then she simply stayed quiet. Silence slowly became doubt. Doubt slowly became distance. Ethan noticed the change. The phone calls became shorter. Dinner plans were canceled more often. Her laughter didn't come as easily anymore. Still, he refused to believe love could disappear so quickly. What Olivia never knew was that Ethan had been working on something after everyone else went to sleep. Late every night, after leaving the repair shop and checking on his mother, he sat at a small wooden desk in his bedroom surrounded by notebooks filled with sketches, calculations, and handwritten ideas. Over years of repairing engines, he had developed an innovative design that could dramatically improve fuel efficiency for commercial equipment. It wasn't complete yet, and he had no investors, no business partners, and no money to build a prototype. All he had was belief. He wanted to wait until everything was ready before telling Olivia. He dreamed of surprising her. He imagined asking her to marry him, then showing her the plans that he believed could change their future forever. He wanted her to see that although his pockets were nearly empty, his determination never was. So he kept working in silence. Every late night, every early morning, every spare dollar he could save went toward buying materials for his invention instead of buying new clothes or replacing his aging truck. To everyone else, he looked like a man going nowhere. Only Ethan knew he was building something that could change his life. But dreams often demand one final test before they become reality. And Ethan's test arrived on a cool autumn afternoon, when he walked into a small jewelry store with every dollar he had managed to save over the previous year. He wasn't looking for the biggest diamond. He was looking for a promise. A promise he hoped Olivia would cherish more than the price attached to it. He had no idea that within a few days, one answer would break his heart and unknowingly set him on the path to becoming the man the entire world would one day admire. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Ethan left the jewelry store holding a small velvet box that fit neatly into the palm of his hand. To anyone else, it was a modest engagement ring. To him, it represented countless hours of sacrifice, skipped meals, overtime shifts, and the hope that the woman he loved would see his heart instead of his bank account. For the next several days, he planned every detail. He chose the little lakeside park where they had shared their very first date. It wasn't expensive. There were no musicians, no photographers hiding behind trees, no elaborate decorations. Just a wooden dock stretching over calm water, the place where they had once promised they would always face life's challenges together. Ethan believed that memory alone would make the moment unforgettable. As the sun began to set, he waited nervously with the ring tucked safely inside his jacket. When Olivia arrived, she smiled politely, but something about her expression felt different. There was a distance in her eyes that Ethan couldn't explain. They talked for a while, laughing about old memories and remembering how they had first met at the community fundraiser years before. For a brief moment, it felt like nothing had changed. Then Ethan reached into his pocket. His hands trembled. His heart raced faster than it ever had. He slowly knelt on one knee. "Olivia," he said softly, "you've been my best friend, my greatest blessing, and the person I've imagined spending the rest of my life with. I know I can't offer you a mansion today. I can't promise expensive vacations or luxury cars. But I can promise that every morning you'll wake up knowing you're loved, respected, and never alone. Will you marry me?" For several seconds, she said nothing. Her eyes moved from Ethan's face to the small ring in his hand. Then she let out a quiet laugh. At first, Ethan thought she was overwhelmed. But the smile on her face wasn't one of joy. It was disappointment. She slowly shook her head. "Ethan, you're a wonderful man." He felt a small sense of relief. Then she continued, "But wonderful isn't enough." His smile faded. "I've spent my whole life watching people struggle because they didn't have money. I promised myself I would never live like that again." Ethan swallowed hard. "I know things are difficult now," he replied, "but they won't always be. I'm working on something. Just trust me a little longer." She looked at him with sadness. "That's exactly the problem. I've been trusting one day for years. You keep talking about the future. I have to live in the present." Ethan lowered his eyes. "I love you." Olivia took a slow breath before saying the words that would echo in his mind for years. "Love doesn't pay bills." Silence filled the space between them. The gentle sound of waves against the dock suddenly felt louder than ever. She stepped backward. "I hope one day you find everything you're looking for. But I can't wait anymore." Without another word, she turned around and walked toward the parking lot. Ethan remained frozen on one knee. The ring was still in his hand. He watched until her car disappeared down the road. Only then did he realize she wasn't coming back. For a long time, he didn't move. The sun disappeared below the horizon. The air grew colder. Yet Ethan stayed exactly where he was, staring at the empty road as though hoping she might change her mind. She never did. When he finally stood up, he slipped the ring back into its box and quietly whispered to himself. Maybe she was right. It was the first time in years that doubt had entered his heart. As he drove home that evening, he couldn't stop replaying those 4 words. Love doesn't pay bills. They hurt more than the rejection itself. Because deep down, he feared they might be true. But life wasn't finished testing Ethan. Just 3 days later, he would receive a phone call that would change everything. And unlike the pain of that evening, there would be no chance to say goodbye. Ethan's phone rang just after sunrise. He had barely slept. The engagement ring was still sitting inside its velvet box on the kitchen table where he had left it the night before. Every time he looked at it, Olivia's words echoed through his mind. He almost ignored the call. When he finally answered, the voice on the other end spoke only a few words. "You need to come to the hospital immediately." His heart sank. Without asking another question, he grabbed his truck keys and drove faster than he ever had before. The traffic lights seemed endless. Every passing minute felt like an hour. By the time he reached the hospital, Doctors and nurses were already gathered outside his mother's room. One look at their faces told him everything he needed to know. Linda Carter was gone. For a moment, the world became completely silent. Ethan stepped into the room with trembling legs. The machines had stopped. The room that had once been filled with her gentle voice now carried only an unbearable stillness. He sat beside her bed and held her hand one final time. It was still warm. Tears rolled down his face as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. I tried." His voice broke. "I really tried." A nurse quietly placed a small envelope on the bedside table. "She wanted you to have this," she said before leaving the room. Ethan stared at the envelope for several minutes before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter. He immediately recognized his mother's careful handwriting. "My dear Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I'm finally at peace. Please don't spend another day blaming yourself. You gave me more love than any mother could ever ask for." His hands began to shake. "I've watched you sacrifice your dreams for me. I've watched you work until your body could barely keep going. But I never wanted my illness to become the reason you stopped believing in your future." Tears blurred the words. He wiped his eyes and continued reading. "People may judge you by what you own today. Let them. Character always reveals itself before success does. Never allow rejection to convince you that your value depends on someone else's opinion." Ethan lowered the letter. It felt as though his mother was sitting beside him. He unfolded one final page tucked inside the envelope. It wasn't a letter. It was a collection of old sketches, business ideas, engineering notes, design improvements. Ideas Ethan had once shared with his mother years earlier before life became consumed by hospital visits and financial struggles. She had kept every single page. Across the top of the first sheet, she had written just one sentence. "The world may not see your gift yet, but don't bury it because someone else couldn't recognize it." Ethan closed his eyes. For the first time since Olivia walked away, he understood something. She hadn't rejected his worth. She had rejected the version of his future she could see. There was a difference, and that difference changed everything. The weeks that followed were the hardest of his life. He buried his mother beside his father in the small cemetery overlooking Maple Ridge. After the funeral, neighbors slowly returned to their normal lives. The repair shop reopened. The bills continued arriving. Nothing about the outside world seemed different. But inside Ethan, something had changed forever. Instead of spending every evening replaying his heartbreak, he returned to the notebooks his mother had saved. Night after night, he refined his engineering designs. He studied online courses, read books borrowed from the public library, contacted professors whose names he found in research articles, asking questions most people were too afraid to ask. Many ignored him. Some politely declined. A few laughed at the ambitious mechanic who believed he could build technology capable of competing with billion-dollar companies. Every rejection reminded him of that evening by the lake. But instead of stopping, he kept going. Because this time, he wasn't trying to prove Olivia wrong. He was trying to honor the woman who had believed in him until her very last breath. Months later, carrying nothing more than a backpack filled with notebooks and the last of his savings, Ethan locked the front door of his childhood home. He climbed into his old pickup truck and looked back one final time. Then he whispered, "Thank you, Mom." With that, he started the engine and drove toward a future he couldn't yet see. He had no investors, no wealthy connections, no guarantees, only a promise to himself that he would never again allow someone else's opinion to define the limits of his dream. He didn't know it then, but hundreds of miles away, the opportunity that would transform his entire life was already waiting for him. Ethan drove for nearly 2 days before the skyline of Pittsburgh appeared in the distance. It wasn't the city he had always imagined building his future in, but it was where opportunity had quietly begun calling his name. A small manufacturing company had posted an opening for a maintenance technician. The pay wasn't remarkable, but it was enough to cover rent while giving him access to the kind of machinery he had only read about in books. He rented a tiny apartment above an old grocery store. The walls were thin. The furniture barely matched. His kitchen table doubled as his workshop. Every evening after finishing a 10-hour shift, he returned home, made himself a simple meal, and opened the notebooks his mother had preserved so carefully. While most of the city slept, Ethan worked. Sometimes until 2 in the morning, sometimes until sunrise. There were nights when an idea seemed brilliant, only to fail completely a few hours later. Small prototypes cracked under pressure. Measurements were off by fractions of an inch. Components overheated. Weeks of progress disappeared because of one tiny mistake. Each failure forced him to begin again. Many people would have quit. Ethan refused. Whenever frustration threatened to overwhelm him, he unfolded his mother's letter and read the same sentence over and over. Don't bury your gift because someone else couldn't recognize it. Those words became stronger than every setback. Nearly 18 months passed before Ethan finally built a working prototype. It wasn't beautiful. The metal housing was scratched. Several parts had been welded together by hand. But when he switched it on, it worked. For the first time, his energy efficiency system performed exactly as he had imagined years earlier in that small repair shop back in Maple Ridge. He sat quietly in his apartment staring at the machine, not celebrating, not shouting, simply thanking God for giving him the strength to keep going. The next challenge was convincing someone else to believe in it. That proved far more difficult. He contacted investors. Most never responded. Some rejected him within minutes. A few listened politely before asking the same question. Which university did you graduate from? When Ethan admitted he had never attended college, the meetings usually ended. Others questioned his appearance, his inexpensive clothes, his old pickup truck, his lack of business experience. One investor even smiled before saying, "You seem like a hard-working mechanic, Mr. Carter. You should probably stay one." The room filled with quiet laughter. Ethan thanked them for their time, picked up his prototype, and walked out without saying another word. The rejection reminded him of Olivia. Different room, different people, same judgment. They saw his circumstances, not his potential. Months continued to pass. His savings disappeared. The rent became overdue. There were evenings when he wondered whether selling the prototype was the only way to survive. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, something happened that he would remember for the rest of his life. His supervisor asked him to repair a production machine that had unexpectedly shut down. The company had already called several specialists. None of them could identify the problem. Every minute the machine remained idle was costing the business thousands of dollars. Ethan examined the equipment for less than 20 minutes. He noticed something everyone else had overlooked: a tiny defect hidden deep inside the cooling system. He repaired it using spare parts already sitting in the maintenance room. Within minutes, the entire production line came back to life. Employees erupted in applause. Standing nearby was a visitor no one had recognized. His name was Daniel Whitmore, the founder of a respected manufacturing investment firm. He had been touring the facility when the breakdown occurred. Instead of leaving after the machine restarted, Daniel quietly walked over to Ethan. "Where did you learn to solve problems like that?" he asked. Ethan smiled modestly. "I've spent most of my life fixing things people thought couldn't be fixed." Daniel looked at him carefully. "Machines?" Ethan shook his head. "Sometimes machines. Sometimes dreams." Daniel couldn't help but smile. There was something different about this young mechanic. Not arrogance. Not desperation. Just quiet confidence. Before leaving the factory, Daniel handed Ethan a business card. "If you ever build something of your own," he said, "come see me." Ethan reached into his backpack. "I already have." He carefully placed his prototype on the table between them. Daniel looked down at the unusual device, then back at Ethan. "What exactly am I looking at?" Ethan took a deep breath. For years he had waited for someone to ask him that question, and the answer he was about to give would become the beginning of a journey that neither of them could have imagined. Ethan carefully placed the prototype on the conference table. For a moment, neither man spoke. Daniel Whitmore studied the device from every angle. It wasn't polished. The paint was chipped in places, and the wiring was neatly arranged but clearly assembled by hand. It looked nothing like the sleek products displayed by major corporations. Yet Daniel wasn't interested in appearances. He was interested in whether it solved a real problem. "So," he said, folding his arms, "tell me why I shouldn't think this is just another invention that promises everything and delivers nothing." Ethan smiled. "Because I'm not asking you to believe me." He plugged the prototype into a demonstration unit he had carried with him. "I'm asking you to watch." Within minutes, the numbers on the monitoring screen began to change. Energy consumption dropped. Efficiency increased. The machine performed the same amount of work while using noticeably less power. Daniel frowned. He checked the readings himself. Then he asked for the test to be repeated. The results were nearly identical. Again and again. By the end of the afternoon, Daniel had only one question left. How long have you been working on this? Ethan looked down at his calloused hands. Almost 8 years. Daniel nodded slowly. 8 years. He leaned back in his chair. Most people would have given up after 8 months. Ethan answered quietly. I almost did. Daniel smiled. I'm glad you didn't. Over the following weeks, engineers from Daniel's company conducted independent testing. They searched for flaws. They challenged Ethan's calculations. They tried to prove the prototype couldn't perform consistently. Instead, it exceeded every expectation. Soon afterward, Daniel invited Ethan back to his office. This time, there were attorneys, financial advisors, and senior executives waiting inside. Ethan assumed they were going to explain why they couldn't move forward. Instead, Daniel slid a folder across the table. I'd like to become your first investor. Ethan stared at him. I don't understand. Daniel laughed. That's because you've spent so much time hearing no that you've forgotten what yes sounds like. For several seconds, Ethan couldn't speak. His eyes slowly filled with tears. Not because he was thinking about money, but because he wished his mother could have witnessed this moment. Daniel noticed the silence. Is everything all right? Ethan smiled through tears. My mother believed in this before anyone else did. Daniel gently closed the folder. Then let's make sure her faith wasn't wasted. That afternoon, Ethan signed the first contract of his life. It wasn't worth millions. Not yet. But it gave him something far more valuable. A chance. Within 2 years, Ethan's small workshop grew into a thriving engineering company. The invention that so many people had dismissed was now helping manufacturers reduce costs across the country. Businesses that had once ignored his emails were suddenly competing to partner with him. Industry magazines featured him on their covers. Television interviews followed. National awards. Speaking invitations. Recognition from leaders he had once admired from afar. Yet despite everything changing around him, one thing never changed within him. He still arrived at work before everyone else. He still remembered the names of every employee. He still walked through the factory shaking hands with mechanics, cleaners, receptionists, and security guards. Whenever someone congratulated him on becoming successful, Ethan always gave the same answer. Success didn't change who I was. It revealed who I chose to become. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Olivia's life had taken a very different path. After rejecting Ethan, she had accepted the attention of a wealthy real estate developer named Brandon Hayes. Brandon seemed to have everything Ethan didn't. A luxury home, expensive cars, designer suits, weekend trips that filled social media with photographs most people only dreamed of taking. Friends congratulated Olivia. Some even told her she had made the smartest decision of her life. For a while, she believed them. But photographs rarely tell the whole story. Behind the carefully staged smiles, the marriage was quietly falling apart. The kindness that had first attracted her to Brandon slowly disappeared. Conversations became arguments. Arguments became long stretches of silence. The expensive house no longer felt like a home. The luxury cars couldn't carry happiness. The wealth she had spent years chasing couldn't buy the peace she thought it promised. Then, after only a few years together, the marriage ended. Olivia walked away with financial security, but an emptiness she couldn't explain. Late one evening, while scrolling through the news on her phone, a familiar face suddenly appeared on the screen. She froze. It was Ethan, standing beside the president of a national business association, holding an award recognizing one of the country's fastest-growing companies. Her heart skipped a beat. She whispered his name under her breath. It couldn't be. The quiet mechanic from Maple Ridge, the man she once believed had no future, had somehow become one of the most admired entrepreneurs in America. What Olivia didn't know was that fate had already begun arranging a meeting neither of them expected. A meeting that would finally answer the question she had been asking herself for years. What if I had said yes? The news article remained open on Olivia's phone for several minutes. She read the headline again and again. Young entrepreneur Ethan Carter receives national recognition for revolutionary technology. The name was impossible to ignore. The face on the screen belonged to the same man who had once stood beside a quiet lake, holding a small ring in his hand. The same man she had walked away from. The same man she had believed would spend his entire life struggling. But now the world saw what she failed to see. A man with determination. A man with vision. A man who had built something extraordinary from the very struggles she once considered a weakness. For the first time in years, Olivia wondered what would have happened if she had looked beyond the surface, if she had believed in him, if she had stayed. But life doesn't allow people to rewrite the past. It only gives them opportunities to face it. A few months later, Ethan received an invitation to attend one of the biggest charity events in New York City. The event brought together entrepreneurs, celebrities, investors, and philanthropists from across the country. The organization wanted Ethan to speak about his journey and announce a new foundation created to help young people from struggling families pursue their dreams. Ethan accepted, not because he enjoyed being celebrated, but because he wanted people to understand something his mother had taught him. A difficult beginning does not determine the ending. On the night of the gala, hundreds of guests filled the ballroom. Nobody knew the emotional history hidden behind the evening. Nobody knew that among the guests was someone from Ethan's past. Olivia had received an invitation through a former business connection. When she entered the room, she expected another formal gathering. She expected speeches, networking, polite conversations. She never expected to see him. Then the lights dimmed. The host walked onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we honor a man whose story reminds us that success is not always inherited. Sometimes it is built through sacrifice, patience, and courage. The crowd applauded. And now, please welcome the founder of Carter Innovations, Ethan Carter. The entire room stood. Olivia didn't. She couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the stage. The man who walked forward looked different. Not because of the expensive suit, not because of the success surrounding him, but because he carried himself with a confidence she had never seen before. Yet somehow, he was still the same Ethan, the same kind person who used to stop and help strangers, the same man who had once loved her completely. When their eyes met across the room, Olivia expected anger. She expected him to look away. Instead, Ethan gave her a small, respectful smile. And somehow, that hurt more, because anger would have been easier to accept. After his speech, Ethan stepped away from the crowd. A few moments later, Olivia found the courage to approach him. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, she whispered, "Congratulations." Ethan smiled. "Thank you." She looked around the room. "Everyone here knows your story." Ethan nodded. "But they don't know the whole story." Olivia lowered her eyes. "I do." The silence between them carried 7 years of memories. "I was wrong," she finally said. Those 3 words were harder for her to say than she expected. "I judged you by what you had instead of who you were." Ethan listened quietly. "I thought I was choosing security," she continued. "I thought I was protecting myself from a difficult life." Her voice became softer. "But I didn't realize I was walking away from someone who was already rich in the things that mattered." Ethan looked at her. "You don't have to apologize for choosing the life you wanted." She looked surprised. "I hurt you." "Yes," Ethan admitted. The honesty caught her off guard. "But that pain taught me something." "What?" "That my worth was never determined by whether someone else recognized it." Olivia fought back tears. "I wish I had understood that then." Ethan looked toward the crowd of people celebrating his achievements. "I used to wish that too. Every night. But eventually, I realized something." "What?" "If I had never experienced that pain, I might never have discovered what I was capable of." The words stayed with her. Because she finally understood. Ethan didn't become successful because she rejected him. He became successful because, even after being rejected, he refused to give up on himself. Later that evening, Ethan stepped back onto the stage. The room became quiet. He looked at the audience and spoke about his mother. He spoke about hardship. He spoke about failure. Then he said something that surprised everyone. "The people who walk away from us during our hardest seasons can sometimes become the reason we discover our greatest strength. But we should never build our success just to prove them wrong. We should build it because we owe ourselves the chance to become who we were meant to be." The crowd applauded. But Ethan wasn't looking at the applause. He was thinking about a small kitchen table, an old notebook, and a mother who believed in him before anyone else did. Years later, people would remember Ethan Carter as a successful entrepreneur. But those who truly knew him understood something deeper. His greatest achievement wasn't building a company. It wasn't becoming wealthy. It wasn't receiving awards. His greatest achievement was refusing to let rejection turn his heart bitter. As for Olivia, she continued her own journey. She volunteered with organizations helping young people understand the importance of character, patience, and believing in themselves. Not because she wanted Ethan back, but because she finally understood the lesson she had once missed. A person's value is not always visible at the beginning of their journey. Sometimes the world only notices someone after they have survived the struggles nobody saw. And perhaps the biggest mistake we can make is judging someone's future by what their present looks like. Because the person everyone ignores today could become the person everyone admires tomorrow. So let us know in the comments. If you were Ethan, would you have forgiven Olivia after everything that happened? Or do you believe some choices change relationships forever? Before you leave, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next emotional journey.